The topic for today's class is discrimination. We're going to look at it from the spiritual context. So in the spiritual context, discrimination is a mental, intellectual process that guides your actions or choices. It is how you make decisions. You discriminate so that your mind and your intellect can make a choice or take an action. In order for you to make a choice or take an action, you have to know what it is that you're choosing between. And what is the reason? What is driving you to take this action? So in the spiritual context, if you go back to the beginning of the journey, people start seeking. Why do you seek? Because you feel something is missing and you are seeking that which is missing. Then you go along a little bit and maybe you read something, you hear something, and then you find out that maybe this thing that is missing in your life is this thing called the self. You know your mind, your body, your intellect, your emotions, but there's something else. Maybe that's the missing thing. So at least you know, or you think you know, what you are seeking. So now, every time you take an action or you make a choice, since you're seeking something, that's your goal. You now have a goal for the seeking. And in your life, at least from a spiritual sadhana point of view, every choice or action you take will either move you towards your goal or away from it. That is the framework or the setup. That is the role that discrimination plays. Your discrimination, i.e., the sum of your intelligent choices, will either move you towards the goal, towards what you seek, or away. So, if you look at something like Bhagavad Gita, this is dealt with in chapter 2. You learn about the existence of the soul. You are told that you are not just your senses, your mind, your body, but there is something else that is your higher nature. And that is what you seek. As you go later on in the path, you learn of this buddhi, the component within you called your buddhi, intelligent will, the divine intelligence that is actually available to you, that can then guide your mind and your intellect to discriminate well. So with this framework, you are making a distinction, or you're discriminating between what moves you away from your goal and what moves you towards your goal. So where is this soul? It's not physical, so you can't find it. I can't give you directions. So then another concept is useful. Once you realize that you are this thing and you are seeking it, There is the concept of pavriti and nivritti. The consciousness, your attention, your conscious attention or the focus of your chit is normally flowing outward. So you are embedded in your senses, in your mind, in your emotions, all outward looking. You interact with the sensory world, you develop desires, you act on them, your mind figures out ways to fulfill those desires, and you get caught in this loop. It's all outward flowing. There is nivritti, an inward flow, where you take the same consciousness, the focus of your attention that was flowing outward, and you turn it inward. That's the direction you need to go to find what you're seeking. So this movement from outward to inward, that change in your orientation requires you to know, first of all, that there is something inward. And that is the direction you need to go. So you go through all those stages before you start really working on discrimination, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't know what you're discriminating. You don't have a goal. You don't know which way. So this is the setup for your discrimination. What takes you outward versus what takes you inward towards what you are seeking, your goal. That is what you're discriminating at all times. But in the beginning of the journey, the discrimination process, right? You're making choices, taking actions. Who does that? It's your mind and your intellect. These are all components of your system that are built on the gunas of Prakriti, the ever-changing modes of Prakriti. And because of that, in the early stages, your intellect and your mind are built on an unstable, ever-changing platform. The three gunas of Prakriti is what underlies your lower nature. Because they are in constant movement, they don't give you a stable platform. That is why your mind and your intellect don't give you stable decisions in the beginning. But at least now you have a compass, right? Which direction you're trying to go. You might fail a few times, you might succeed, and then slowly with practice, you get better at this. It becomes more and more stable. That is why in the Gita, you come to a milestone called the stable intellect, Sthita Prajna. So the basis of discrimination in your everyday life, as far as spirituality goes, is deciding which choices and which actions take you inward towards the self, and which continue the flow outward towards the sensory world. And that, in a nutshell, is what you're doing in the early stages when you're learning to discriminate. On an experiential basis, if you think about it before you awoke, before you figured out that there is another dimension to life. You only knew about this one dimension: senses, desire, physicality, mental, and you existed there. Now that you are aware of this other dimension and you're trying to reach it, you have to free up your consciousness where it's trapped in this outer dimension and somehow move it in. So that is why you turn inward. You try to withdraw the focus of your attention from all these sensory things and move it and try to focus on something that when you begin the process, you don't even know what it is that you're trying to focus on. That's what makes it hard. But once you discover this inner dimension, and then you have a target to focus on, and you get reasonably stable in it, then what you do is you turn around and from this inner dimension, while being linked to this inner dimension, then you interact with this outer dimension. Then life becomes fun. Because as long as you're linked with that self, and then you can interact with the sensory world. You never lose your compass. You're not. You get a stable platform to stand on. You get stability in your consciousness. It's a matter of practice. This is why they tell you, abhyasa. You have constant practice. That's how you do this. It's not something that happens like this. And then as the stability comes and you start moving in and interacting with the outside world, you also develop equanimity. The equanimity can come only when you are standing on something stable. Equanimity means no matter what is happening, you're stable. If you're out here standing on this rocking, moving Prakriti world, it is going to be very hard to have stability. But in here, things are calm. You have a stable platform. What you are in truth is consciousness. But you think of yourself as a human. And from grade school, they have educated you. You have a physiology, a biology, you have a brain. Then you learned you have a mind, you have emotions, you have desires. You've learned about all of these, right? You have a mental component, you have a vital component, you have a physical component. You've learned all this. So that is what you think you are. If you have a thought or you feel something that is real to you, that is your reality. You take it personally. Every thought, you get angry, you're justified in your anger because you think somebody actually did something to you and you feel a certain way. And you act on it. So that is your consciousness completely identified with this world that you perceive through your senses. But somewhere in this journey, you learn that there is another world. The world of consciousness, the inner dimension. And if you learn to de-identify, meaning free up your consciousness from where it is bound with your mind, with your emotions, with your senses, with your desires. If you separate your consciousness from these components, right, you will become aware of yourself as something other than those things, and we give it a name. But this process of freeing up from where your consciousness was bound is not a one-shot deal. It doesn't happen like that. It's a process. This is the process of yoga. It's slow and it requires multiple cycles. Once you free up even some part of you from being bound, you have distance. You have distance between what you think and what you feel. That is when the light bulb goes off for people that, hey, I am not my thought. Because I can see myself thinking. I'm not my emotion. I have anger, but I am not angry. The I is separate. That's why it can say it has anger. So that dimension where your consciousness is freed up from being bound in the outer dimension, that's we call the inner dimension. The dimension of spirit, the dimension of self, however you want to think about it. But it's not this external dimension of matter and mind and senses. When you're first seeking, you're seeking that freed up consciousness, the core of which is already present in you, yourself. So that is what I'm referring to when I say you pull back in to the self, or you turn away from the dimension of the senses to move in. And if you look at different yoga paths, some ask you to turn away from the outside world to move and find this before you then turn around and then interact with the world. And some just ask you to slowly detach yourself from this sensory world piece by piece. And in that process, you will move into this inner dimension.